while I was watching. Oh, you're looking stuff up? Great. Good. I don't have to do all the work. I wanted to just start, without people going into long psychodynamic explanations, please. Just some impressions people had or some questions you might have had, in terms of what you've just seen. I had my own reaction to Drescher, but I just wondered what other people's thoughts were, so we can see if we can all get to the same place somehow. Maybe not. Anybody? Anybody like the movie? Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes.
I can sense envy.
Envy? Of whom?
Of the relationship, of what was happening between these two people.
Who was seeing the movie for the first time? A lot of you. Okay. And who did? And I saw the movie in the movies like 20 years ago, and there was the publicity campaign was don't tell anybody what you've seen in the movie. So what you weren't supposed to see is the scene where he discovers the mixed gender of Dill. So many of you were seeing that for the first time too, or did you have a sense of what was going on? Because in 1992, there were not a lot of openly trans people in the world.
Right.
So it was a very different world than it is today, where it's more evident.
I picked it up as soon as I saw the photograph. Immediately. As the photograph.
Good trans love.
Okay. Well, first of all, yes.
It struck me that it wasn't about a particular identity as much as it was about how do people need to be part of violence and need to be part of love, connection, and passion. That, these two men, the original two men, each were involved in very slick, street smart, and violent cultures of community. And each of them both were men of great sensitivity, love, and understanding of connection. And how that also plays out in the female character. And it seems to me much more about those parts, for me, my reaction is a lot about the tension of those parts, the disconnects and reconnects, and a lot of not understanding of all that I saw.
But also, one thing that made me think more is I felt like when he was kind of when he got in love with the girl, and then that he realized that she's trans. I felt that he was more looking into the guy that died in this girl. So I felt that it's more than it wasn't like a heterosexual love. It was more like more of a homoerotic feeling toward the guy who died earlier.
And killed.
And good, yes.
Well, there's Freud wrote a very short paper, so it's easy to read, called Mourning and Melancholia. And the Freudian notion of identification is that we identify with the objects that we've lost. And so, so suddenly he has lost this very intimate 3-day relationship with someone he's intended to kill, and at the end he moves into the person's life himself. So we would call, from a psychological perspective, we would think of that as an identification. Why he identified, we don't know, but that's how they played out the script. It reminded me Betty Davis made 2 movies in which she played twins. One of whom dies and the other one takes her place, and she takes the place. I think I wrote it. I googled that actually while we were watching. So just so you know, those movies were in 1946. She played. The movie was called A Stolen Life, and in '64 she did a similar plot called Dead Ringer. And 2 twins get together. They're not close. One dies, and the other one takes the other one's place because she thinks she has an ideal life. and she discovers that the other one doesn't have an ideal life, and it's much more complicated than that. So here you have Jody. So here's Fergus, who thinks he's got this great chick, that he's going to have this life with, and he discovers that he got more than he bargained for. So that's one thought about that. And the
But he
other,
also wanted to see the guy who died in this person. Like he had, like he cut her hair, he dressed her with his clothes.
That's a very interesting point. That in order to disguise him from the other killers, he dressed him like the man who was killed.
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of ironic moments throughout the film like that, which is a very cleverly scripted film. And we should not confuse scripting with psychology. That's a very important point. Because good script, the telling of a good story is not the same thing as a personality assessment. So that's really an important point.
Well,
there.
and interestingly too, once she has gotten a haircut and is wearing his clothing, she ends up saving him.
And he ended up loving her more.
Yeah.
Right.
And then he ends up paying back by taking the toll and going to prison for her. So there's this constant back and forth.
Right. And she kills the woman who entrapped Jody, and yes, and there are all these sort of, ironic. It was a very ironic film. There were a lot of ironic moments. The man who is most merciful to the prisoner is the man who escapes alive. Although we later learn that two other people escaped alive. The prisoner manages to escape, but ironically he's killed by his own men, his own side of the thing. So irony sort of runs through the film, and I like irony myself. But this was not done in a very heavy-handed way. It was really very well constructed. Great movie. Other reactions?
I have to say, in order for a script to be good, though, it has to speak to some real emotional experience to people, and it needs to tap into those real emotional experience for the audience to identify with the characters, because that's how a film works. You connect at an emotional level with the characters, and then you go through the journey, and then you have a sort of experience that catharsis at the climax.
Yes, but that's not how we live our lives. We don't live our lives.
Definitely not. Definitely not, but it does have to speak to something.
Right, well, I'm a great science fiction fan, for example, and in order for a science fiction film to be good, there has to be some improbable activity which you have suspension of disbelief, and once you get past the most improbable of beliefs, then everything else has to have a realistic component to it. Otherwise, you're right, the audience doesn't respond to it. But then there's something traditionally called a morality play. And morality plays, and this was a morality play, although an ambiguous one, tried to create the notion that good does somehow win in the end. And there's evil defined in this movie, and evil is punished pretty much.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about. That does sort of speak to sort of a side of human condition that idealizes that experience.
Right. Yes. Okay. I accede to that. Anybody else?
I'm going to come back to this as a love story. To me, yes, this is full of irony, and he's an amazing writer, and it was beautifully acted. And there are universalities in there. I wonder if the love story isn't, and movie after movie after movie is made about people meeting. The notion that they don't seem to fit, but somehow, even though, and so we're invited here. We're invited to participate in a love story, but it's a love story that, we are in some ways told cannot be, and in some ways we're invited to believe that it can be. And I think I wonder how your notion of the morality play fits in with my notion of this
First of all, I think what makes this a very